Football, a sport which is watched by people all around the world. The World Cup provides viewing figures which rises into the billions. And to put things into perspective, these numbers heavily outweigh the Olympics and the Super Bowl. With such light being shined on football throughout history, it's hard to believe that the laws of the game are still under so much scrutiny. Football has certainly evolved with their rulings throughout history. We can go all the way back to 1863, when the offside rule was first introduced, with the aim of it being to bring a more dynamic and strategic flow to the game. And this rule has continued to evolve after further changes in 1925 and 1990. Then, we had goal line technology being brought into play after Frank Lampard's ghost goal was not given on the biggest stage against Germany in the 2010 World Cup. And if we look to even more recent events, VAR entered the stage in 2019 to help take the pressure off of referees whilst aiming to correct clear and obvious errors. So there's proof that FIFA are willing to adapt their rulings. But if you approached any fan in the world and simply asked them, are you fully content with all of the laws of the game? I believe most would say no. And they'd also have an example of discontent to give on the spot. You've got Arsene Wenger suggesting a crazy idea of shortening matches to just 60 minutes, whilst FIFA are flirting with the idea of having no rebounds for penalty kicks in the 2026 World Cup. It's evident that FIFA representatives and supporters worldwide have a mutual agreement that more needs to be done to improve the laws of the game. But football must remain cautious in order to protect the sport's identity. So in this video, I'm going to share some of my frustrations towards the current rulebook, whilst bringing forward some new ideas which I'd like to see being put in place. Beyond that, I'll also be looking into a data chart created by Sky Sports, which brought forward over 20 new rule ideas, and each of them will be receiving a grade out of 10. Ultimately, I'm looking to find changes which will help take the pressure off of referees, reduce player simulation, and most importantly, to enhance the entertainment factor for spectators. So as I briefly touched on, Arsene Wenger suggested the ludicrous idea of shortening games to 60 minutes due to the amount of time where the ball is spent out of play. And that heavily stems from players feeling as though, well, they're under no time constraints. How often towards the latter stages of games do we see the winning side completely drain the life out of the final stages? Whether that be goalkeepers taking an age from goal kicks or players casually walking off the pitch when being substituted. Now, of course, when your team is winning, it's something you want to see from your players, and it can be argued that it's just the nature of the beast. But for me, there are too many occasions where it ruins the spectacle for those who are mutual spectators, and viewing figures will be dominated by those within this bracket. We often now see stoppage time numbers rising to 8+ minutes, but does this not just show us that the referees are accepting the time wasting, as they can simply just rely on the fourth official's board to make up for lost time after 90 minutes, almost like a get out of jail card? I believe that stoppage time should be used to make up for lost time from genuine injuries, from VAR intervals, as well as goal celebrations. But I don't believe it should be used to make up for players pushing past the laws of the game. From what I see, I just feel like it's all too heavily reliant on the individual referee's level of patience and style of officiating, whereas I'd prefer the rulings to become so powerful that it becomes a case where the referee must follow the rulebook to ensure there's a level of consistency. So how can football combat this? In the recent Club World Cup, FIFA introduced a rule whereby if a goalkeeper took longer than 8 seconds to release the ball, the referee would blow their whistle and call for an opposing corner. This is a great sign that FIFA are trying to be proactive with dealing with time wasting, and I hope we soon get to the stage where this rule is present across all levels of football. So if we can have a timer for when the goalkeeper has the ball in hand, why can't we also have a timer from goal kicks, throw-ins, free kicks and substitutions? Naturally, you couldn't have the same timer for all of these events, as throw-ins will happen much quicker than goal kicks, for example. But why couldn't there be an official, let's say in the VAR room, who purely focuses on set timings? I know the fourth official tends to be the figure that time stoppages, but they're also having to deal with, let's say, player and manager disputes on the touchline. I'll give an example. I would set a strong stance that a player getting substituted must get off the pitch within 15 seconds after their number goes up on the board. And if a player takes longer than 15 seconds, they're simply booked, with the official in the VAR room communicating to the on-field referee that the player has taken longer than the allocated time. Time exemptions can be made for players who are carrying knocks, with the options being that they can exit the pitch through the nearest touchline, or if a physio has already entered the pitch, then the 15-second timer is exempt and 1 minute will simply be added on to stoppage time to avoid any attempts of navigating the rules. I'd say 15 seconds is a fair amount of time. Players don't have to sprint off the pitch, but they also can't walk. Then for goal kicks, you could have the timer increased to 30 seconds, giving the outfield players enough time to set into their shape, whilst allowing the goalkeeper time to retrieve the ball from either a ball boy, or I've even seen at some MLS grounds they use what kind of looks like a football feeder machine, where a keeper can quickly receive a new ball. Now if the keeper doesn't release the ball in time, they get booked, and if it happens again, the opposing team gets a central indirect free kick. Or if you think that's too harsh, it can just be a corner. In conclusion, I'm simply trying to prevent players from taking liberties, and so enforcing these firm rules will not only become a new norm for players, but it will help improve the rhythm of play. So now I'm going to move away from time wasting, with the next topic being handball. Now this one isn't necessarily a rule change, but more of a moan at the fact that we still see headlines disputing handball decisions within the box, despite having the introduction of VAR. Referees tend to give handball against players without hesitation in areas of the pitch, which offers little threat to either side. And yet, there still seems to be plenty of discussion when it comes to handlings from within inside the penalty box. The main issue which I have is that it seems as though referees from across the globe all have their own different levels of strictness when it comes to handball. And this is heavily exposed within major competitions, such as the Champions League and World Cup. In England, I'd say refs are hesitant to give handballs inside the box. Yet in other parts of the world, they tend to give the foul when any ball-to-hand contact happens. What I find interesting is when an attacker handles the ball within the box, the goal will be chalked off with no argument involved. But we just can't seem to get it right when it comes to the defensive team handling the ball. The laws of the game state that a handball must be given when an outfield player deliberately handles the ball, or when a player naturally makes their body bigger. Now the problem with this is that it's still subjective, especially when we talk about deliberate. However, what we can do is bring common sense into play. For example, a penalty should not be given for when a player crosses the ball and it directly strikes a defender's arm when they're stood only 1 yard away. For me, a handball should be given for when the ball is heading towards goal from a shot and the arm is away from any legal part of the body, or if a player has their hand raised above their head, or if a player moves their hand towards the ball to prevent a dangerous pass. I think my ultimate concern is that there's a lack of consistency, and I do feel like in preparation for major competitions, FIFA can do more to set the tone amongst their referees. Because at the moment, it just seems as though referees all have their own perspectives on the foul, and this simply should never be allowed to happen. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to switch things up with the direction of this video. Whereas before I gave my own suggestions, now I'm going to evaluate the results of over 7,000 fans who answered a Sky Sports study, which focused on potential new rules. Each rule is going to receive a ranking out of 10, so let's see if you'll agree with me as we go along. So the first one is, should all diving be punished? And the answer to that is simply yes. I'd personally score this a 10 out of 10 ranking, and I'd like to see referees show the courage to discipline players for simulation when they are already on a yellow card. So the graph has this one as the most popular, and I also agree. Moving down the list, should only captains speak to the referee? And I'm going to link this in with the rule below, which is sin bin for dissent. Now, of course, in an ideal world, we wouldn't see players surrounding the referee after a key decision has been made. But I just feel like the game would lose its spark if only the captain could talk to the referee. Is it just me that feels like matches would become really robotic? We as fans want to see players show passion, and sometimes this does spill over into the referee's ear. And I'm not defending this. I do believe that all players should be able to speak to the referee, but if it turns into insults, aggression or swearing, then yes, they should be booked. However, the idea of sin bins for dissent is a crazy one. If you had 4 players all surrounding the referee, are you going to send them all off for 10 minutes? Yes, maybe the introduction of this tough rule would change everything, but I feel like this should only be implemented once football gets itself into a perfect position across the laws of the game. So between the two rules, I'm going to score this a 6 out of 10. The next point is 3 VAR challenges a match. Now I assume that this means 3 for each team. I'm not necessarily against evolving VAR into a position where it only becomes active through teams appealing. However, if we strictly follow this graph, the thought of having potentially 6 VAR intervals would be disastrous, as you could see teams making desperate appeals towards the latter stages of the game. You also couldn't bring it down to only 1 challenge each, because if a call was lost in the first half, that would leave the team isolated in the second half, and they wouldn't be able to contest a potentially match-changing decision. It sounds exciting, but I don't think it would work. I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10. Next up is 60-minute matches, and I'm surprised supporters scored this one so highly. I've already shared my thoughts on this rule, and I've given methods I'd use to help prevent so much time being lost. Maybe if you dropped it down to 80 minutes, I'd be willing to listen, but 60 is just too extreme. I'm going to give this a 1 out of 10. Next up, should women's goals be made smaller? Naturally, the goalkeepers in the women's game will be shorter than the men. However, they will be facing shots which carries less venom, so I think it equals out. I've watched the women's Euros and I haven't felt like the size of the goal has played any factor. You'll see some games end 5-0, but also others will end 0-0. There isn't any abnormalities, and so personally I would leave it as it is. I give this a 3 out of 10. Move the wall back to 12 yards. This is a rule which I'm willing to get behind, as I believe it will entice more players to take shots from free kicks, rather than going for safety first approaches. Long range shooting is a dying art in football. The Steven Gerrards, the Lampards, it's fading away. And I also believe the increase in yards would make players more hesitant to commit fouls near the penalty box. So I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. Take free kicks to yourself. I'm giving this a 5 out of 10, as I feel like the speed of play would quicken up as players would look to take an instant advantage, and that's certainly a good thing. I would give it a higher score if players could do this as well as continue with the current setup, but it doesn't specify, so I'll stick with the 5 rating. Bonus points for winning by 2 goals. This gets the first 0 out of 10. It simply just creates a bigger gap between the top teams and the rest of the league. Maybe if you brought it up to 5 goals, I'd budge, but even then it just doesn't feel right. Fouled player must take the pen. I'm sort of in the middle with this one. It would bring fantastic entertainment through having unexpected players step up, but if a penalty is awarded to a team in the last minute, it only seems fair that they are rewarded by having their strongest spot takers step up. I'll give this a 6 out of 10. Offsides only within the final third. I feel like this would just make things too complicated for the officials, and also, how often do you see offsides being given from around the halfway line? And if they are given, they're not match-changing moments, and if they are match-changing, that's the purpose of VAR. I also think drawing more lines on the pitch, it'll become too much. It doesn't happen often enough for there to be a worthy rule change. I give this a 1 out of 10. No points for 0-0. Now, I reckon this would be a fantastic rule to introduce when you've got the top teams going up against each other. However, lower statured teams should not feel obliged to commit players forward when they're up against the best. For example, next season, if Sunderland were holding a 0-0 lead away at Anfield, Sunderland should be rewarded for their efforts, as every point matters. I like the idea as it pushes towards teams creating entertaining matches. However, it doesn't offer a level playing field. So I'll give this a 5 out of 10. The 5's purely for entertainment reasons, but it misses the extra 5 because it's just imbalanced. Some fouls are not a penalty, an instant 0 out of 10 for me, as a foul is a foul, and you can't have players finding shortcuts to prevent the opposing team from scoring. Remove technical area limits. I don't believe managers should be allowed to roam free. Some try to anyway, but it would just look silly having managers run up and down the pitch. The lack of professionalism shown, combined with there being no relevance to improving the laws of the game, gets it a 0 out of 10. Spot moved back by 2 yards. I personally think the setup for penalties is perfect the way it is, but if it happened, I wouldn't be in uproar. So I'll go 6 out of 10. Kick-ins instead of throw-ins, don't get me started, 0 out of 10. American-style shootouts. Now, I've seen clips of it and it does look entertaining, but I find penalty shootouts just as entertaining and it brings a level playing field. So I'll go 4 out of 10. Only 5 in the box for corners is an interesting one, as with only 1.4% of corners leading to goals, it ultimately depends on how big of an advantage do you feel a corner should be for the attacking side. I think the main positive is that it will help officials spot fouls within the box as there's less chaos. But I just feel like this isn't an area of the game which needs major change. However, if it did suddenly spring to light, you wouldn't hear me kick up a fuss. So I'll go 6 out of 10. Next up, roll-in substitutions. This could certainly prevent time wasting, but I just feel as though the rhythm of the game would suffer in other areas. For example, players would find it hard to settle into the game. I also think substitutions is an art for managers when it comes to making tactical adjustments. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. Now the bottom 3, which you can see, are all going to get 0 out of 10s, and the graph agrees with me. Points don't need changing, and the goal size is never under questioning. And the power play, that means a team can take an opposing player off the pitch for 10 minutes, a player of their choice. I don't need to go into how ridiculous this is. So in conclusion, it's fair to say that modern football is going through an historic evolution period, and that is heavily down to the introduction of VAR. Despite this, I still feel a sense of frustration which stems from football still facing so much dispute towards the laws of the game, with rules that have been existent for centuries, especially the handball rule. What I gathered from the Sky Sports list of rules on a personal perspective is that I'm not eager to see major changes towards the laws of the game. That's not what I'm asking for. I don't want FIFA to turn football into a circus. I simply want them to find solutions towards enhancing the rhythm of the game. I want there to be consistency with referees' decisions. I want tougher rules on time wasting, and I feel like this can be easily achieved through tougher officiating on the pitch. Please do let me know your thoughts in the comment section. What rules or adjustments would you like to see being put in place? And do you share the frustration that games too often than not fade away towards the latter stages due to players rinsing the rules with little punishment? Thank you for watching.